Great, I'm so glad to see such a wonderful big crowd, and the whole afternoon actually has seen crowds come through the space and see Jazzmen Lee Johnson's wonderful work of art in our hallway. And this is in some ways the finissage of that long-standing exhibition that we are very sort of proud of, and we're very happy and delighted and honored to have, of course. So I'll just introduce Jazz for a moment and then say a few words about the project, my own take on it, and then let her take over. This day is a little different. Jazz will say a few words here, and then we'll continue with a microphone in front of the artwork where we can look at it together, and then we go into our usual conversation with wine and food as we always do. So I'm Dietrich Neumann. I'm the director of the John Nicholas Brown Center, and I think this is number 27 in our conversations, and certainly a celebration really of your work. And I should say, oh yes, in addition also we have this handout today, which is a real work of art, and I think it came out so beautifully, and I hope there are a few left for you to take home, a real work of art by Jazz. And she has really become a dear colleague and friend in this whole long process that we've gone through. She went to the Rhode Island School of Design, and then is actually an alumna of our program in Public Humanities. She got, of course, our FIT Residence Award last year when she prepared for this, and she has an enormous amount of artistic output, both in printmaking but also in videography and other artistic practices, music as well, and we've had great sessions here with loud music and producing art. And she has had exhibitions in Providence, at RISD, in Baltimore, in New London, in South Africa, in Hong Kong, all over the world really, and is a wonderfully productive and rising and amazing artist with a lot of fellowships and awards to her credit, and has been teaching at the Rhode Island School of Design, at the New Urban Arts here in Providence, and shared her knowledge with many, as you did all afternoon long. And it's really such a delight to have you here and see your work and be able to share our thoughts with you. I wanted to just say what I find so fascinating about this installation is that in some ways what you did is the opposite of the wallpaper that we have. The two works of art, if one wants to call the wallpaper a work of art, it is a commercial product obviously of the 1830s, but they both have in common that they are print products with different layers of color that are applied. But of course, from the sort of woodblock print and then to a silk screen, in your case, that's where the sort of similarities end. And in fact, the differences is that the wallpaper that we have here was a commercial product, naive in many ways for an international market. It was perhaps not even meant to be initially ideological or offensive, but of course the way art works and the way art is received changes over time and is always different from the context. And Jazz's response, I think, is the opposite. It's not naive, it's not illustrative, it's not picturesque. It is actually something that is intentional, that needs work and that needs engagement and close reading. It is a little bit darker than the sort of bright colors of the blue skies that we have in our wallpaper. It is not cute. It avoids perspective, but invites you, with the help of this guide and with your own eyesight, to really dig in and dig deep and suddenly discover an enormous depth of meaning. Rather than the pictorial depth of the perspective, it's a depth of meaning and of history that recalls a mix of your own experiences as an African American woman in this country, and of course refers back to events in African American history from slavery all the way to the present in this country. And I think it's really very, very powerful and meaningful. And I've discovered so many things after I started studying the guide, that I hadn't seen before, and that sort of reveal itself over time. And I love the depth of this and the fact that it needs dedication and commitment. And so on this note, I wanted to thank you for giving us this work of art and bringing so many people to our space, which has always been my wish, to make this a more open and public space that engages discussion. And I want to ask you all to help me welcome Jazzmen Lee Johnson.
Alrighty. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Dietrich. Thank you, Sabina and Marissa and everyone who was involved in realizing this project and in supporting it and being flexible and patient and funding it and creating it, because I definitely did not create it alone. So I just want to start off by saying thank you to everyone who has been involved in making this happen. Thank you. All right. Next, I want to say you look comfortable. That's great. I am going to ask for a little bit of participation in a moment before we go to the hall. So I want you to just mentally prepare, take some breaths, because it's coming up. But first, let's talk about the wallpaper. So, yeah, I just want to make sure everything is in order. Here we are. This is what the hall looked like before Not Nevermore was installed. And just to give you all some background, I'm going to try to be quick so that we can really spend time with the work itself and talk about it like in front of it. But here is the views of North America. It was a wallpaper that was created by a French artist for a French design house in 1834. It is not only situated here, but it is in the diplomatic reception room at the White House and a plethora of other places. This is when it was installed in the White House. Jackie Kennedy, who helped to, of course, sway decoration during that time, was the one who brought the wallpaper to the White House, where it remains to this day. The wallpaper consists of 5 motifs. And I just want to share this with you because now that I have Not Nevermore installed, you may not be able to see all of it. So the 5 motifs are as follows. The view of New York from New Jersey. And you might notice this feature down here, which is seemingly innocent, pleasant scene, but it's actually derived from this series from Edward Clay Williams, mixing up the order of names, but he was an artist that created a series called Life in Philadelphia, and it shows, of course, African Americans trying to assimilate, trying to be fancy, and in a very derogatory way. This is the covering that, I'm calling it a covering now after speaking with someone earlier, but this is my response to that motif, which we can talk about when we get in the hall, but I just wanted to give you a chance to see what it looks like when it's not in that space, which has no gallery lighting or overhead lighting, and it makes it hard to see or read. But this is my view of New York from New Jersey. Yes, and we'll talk about all the elements in the hall. The next motif is the view of West Point Military Academy, which is in New York, and of course still exists today. It's where our higher ranking officers in the U.S. Army go to learn and such. And this is a view of the cadets practicing, lining up, marching, and then some onlookers. Not sure why this isn't moving to the next slide. There we go. Here is my rendering and response to that. And again, we can talk about it in the hall, but you'll notice that there are bison, there's a locomotive, and there is a lithograph print that I pulled from the archive that talks about Reconstruction and sort of what that period was like. And it's sort of a satire of Reconstruction and Othello, which I'll get into. The next motif is the view of Boston Harbor, not far from here. This is my response to that motif, which is a lot of dance, water, moons, fish, and faintly the motif of the how black bodies were situated on the slave ship, to contrast that. And because it appears here twice, we also did a green version. This is the view of the Natural Bridge, which is in Virginia. And again, we have another derogatory, complicated, problematic imagery of a unidentified, non-specific indigenous group performing for a group of white onlookers. This is my response to that. So just so you can take a look before we get into the space. Then we have the view of Niagara Falls. It features some visions of technology there with the steamboat. And this is my response to that. Of course, have to feature young Harriet Tubman and thinking about Niagara Falls and the Underground Railroad and the last river before freedom, headed to Canada. And so here we are. Here we are. All right, I'm presencing Harriet here because now it is time for that moment of participation. Okay? Okay. So, I want to talk a little bit about my methodology, and my methodology, my approach, is very much so rooted in music, in rhythm, in dance, and in hip hop. And so, what I need everyone to do in this moment is to find your rhythmic bones, take a moment, find them, and I need you to clap with me. Don't speed it up. My flows is endless, I'm a catalyst, catapulting, thought-provoking adjectives. Can you handle it? My turn to speak. You can call me an MC, I may be more for poetry, but what I know for sure, I got to speak. I'm blazing something just a little different. This is an intervention from the one-dimensional. Speak, lend me your ears, so I can unclog and fog your vision. You'll be in awe of what real music has to offer. Lend me your ears. And if you're still not feeling this, I flip it like some other people who act the fool to say something on a different tip. Just watch my lips and lend me your ears. Looky here. Okay, so why do I go? Thank you. Why do I go into hip hop? Because it's my approach when I'm making things. When I was thinking about this piece, when I was thinking about this space, we look around. Who do we see on the walls? I was a student here, and I had a very both like great experience and troubled experience. And one of the things that I remember when I first came into this space, already feeling insecure because I went to RISD as an undergrad, I'm an artist, and then I end up at Brown in academia at a graduate level, and I was like, well, I had read more in one semester than I had read in like 5 years combined. So I felt, like I had to prove myself, but also like, what is an artist doing here and how will I be able to like make it here? Let alone I come into this space, I see no one who looks like me, and then I'm surrounded by this wallpaper that features indigenous people, black people, and essentially history in this misrepresented way. And so my whole thing in making this work is presencing both Black diasporic narratives as well as indigenous narratives, which, by the way, don't have to be seen in separate motifs or as monoliths. And so, bringing it back, I wanted to do a little hip hop, first of all, just to shake the space up, to bring some rhythm in, to say we're here, but also hip hop. A quick lesson. 5 elements. The first element, DJing, picking records, playing records. The second element, MCing, master of ceremony, rocking a crowd, telling a story, keeping people entertained, engaged. The next element, I'd say breakdancing, which originally, before it was called breakdancing, which is the commercial term for it, was called b-boys, which meant the kids who dance during the breakbeat. The breakbeat is the point in the beat where you just hear the drums, you hear the pulse, you hear the bass, you hear the rhythm. And they would dance during that section and repeat it so it could last as long as they want. The DJs would keep repeating that section. The fourth element, graffiti. Obviously, connection as an artist, but also what does it mean to graffiti a space? And lastly, which is an element that's not talked about often, is knowledge of self. And so, thinking about knowledge of self, thinking about sampling and remixing and repeating narratives or changing them, thinking about telling stories like a griot or an MC, thinking about the in-between space of the breakbeat, even like an archive, where we might have these documents that say one thing, but what else is in that story? How do we look beyond, what we see on paper, what we see in ledgers, what we see in broadsides, and find the more, difficult parts of history and make sense of them. And so all of those things I present when I'm making something. A forking path for me is no different than a cipher, which would be a circle of people either dancing or rapping, and just sort of bouncing ideas off. So I allow myself to wander and go on forking paths in order to create an image. And lastly, before we move on, I just want you to see the actual historical documents that I pulled from various archives to sort of challenge the narrative that the original artists who created the wallpaper to challenge their vision. So the wallpaper was created in 1834, and for me, I felt like, whoa, that was even before the Civil War. There was still slavery, which is not shown in the wallpaper at all, amongst so many other things. And so I pulled pieces from the archive that sort of contend with this idealistic and romanticized view. So here is a lithograph print that's a satire on the Fugitive Slave Act, which was passed in 1850. And it shows sort of abolitionists on one side and Southerners and sort of, pro-slavery supporters on the other side at a standoff. This motif appears, and it's the icon that was used on a lot of posters advertising that enslaved people had run away, and these are their names, or they would describe what they look like or where they were last seen. When we think about Black power, Black nationalism, Black Panthers, which this isn't the Black Panthers in particular, but sort of that imagery, there's this sense of militance and fighter and fierceness, which is also really different than how the Black people are depicted in the wallpaper. So I want to presence that. This is a lithograph of cotton like tilling cotton and such. This appears again in the Boston motif. It's faint, but it's there, and I wanted, of course, to juxtapose that with dancing. This appears in the West Side, the West Point military motif, and its thoughts on Reconstruction. What happens after the Civil War? What does it mean for Black people? And this is sort of a satire thinking about Reconstruction. That's Andrew Johnson and a Union veteran soldier, like in a scene of Othello. It also shows two really big battles, or massacres, I should say, that took place in one in Memphis and one in New Orleans between Black people and Irish police officers on the left side, and on the right side, just another sort of battle between Blacks and whites that took place both in 1866, post-Civil War. Locomotive, that appears in the West Point motif. A map of Niagara Falls. Another satire cartoon sort of print of Niagara Falls, what happens when it becomes developed in a site of tourism. So let me just zoom in there so you can see some of that. Yeah.
Bridal couples going over the fall.
This appears in the view of the Natural Bridge. So thinking about Virginia and sort of what it means in terms of colonialism and sort of the beginning of what we now know as the United States. Here we have Thomas Jefferson because he owned the Natural Bridge. How does that work? I don't know, but so I cut him out and included him in part of it. This also is in the Natural Bridge. This was basically an act that said you can't mix races. It's a health violation. This is a broadside from the NAACP talking about, we're thinking years and years and years after this wallpaper was created, people were still being lynched. And now I'm just doing a curved turn here to show some production photos of the wallpaper. So we printed on a repeat sort of fabric table, which you would usually print like a repeat pattern. And we printed everything, silk screen printing, 2 or 3 layers, using transparent inks, transparent base in the inks, so that when certain colors overlap, you get a third color. Sewing those together. I did not do the sewing. I have to give a shout out to Liza and Joel here. But you can sort of see what it looks like when it's not in front of the actual wallpaper, which it's really telling that the dark wallpaper and the darkness of this space really changes its vibrancy. This is some of the incredible stitch work that was done. And now, I think we can go look at the work and talk about it and ask questions and tell some things. All right, are we ready? Yep. Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you, everyone. And secondly, I'm going to sort of go through things, and I might go fast or whatever. Feel free to interrupt at any moment to ask a question. Also, feel free to come up, touch, move, lift, look through. Even while I'm talking, it's fine. It's encouraged. So this is the I want to start with this motif. This is the view of New York from New Jersey, and it was actually the first motif that I decided to work on. And again, I was drawn to this imagery right here. There's a lot to be said because it's from the Life in Philadelphia series, the artist's interpretation of that. And even though it may not have been the French artist who created this wallpaper's intention to sort of show black people in a negative light, I think maybe he's even trying to say, oh look, they're amongst other white people, they're equal, you know, they're wearing the same dress. It's still from this series that is offensive. And so I wanted to challenge this, this look of, you know, assimilating, politics of respectability, love, if you will, as this person is bowing to this person. And sort of counter that with two of my own friends who are Brown alum, who are engaged, and to show them in this light that is very different than this formal light. So I actually drew this from a photograph that they shared with me when they were coming home on the train one night, a little tipsy, in New York, after a poetry reading. My friend Desiree here is an amazing author, poet, individual. And I don't know if you can see it, but they're both sort of on the train like, eh. So I just wanted to counteract this like very proper gesture of love with these like badass two individuals who are just like out here doing things. I also layered that with these two images, which you saw in the slideshow of fugitive enslaved people. This was an icon that was used a lot to say, hey, there's some people on the run and they need to go back to the plantation. So I wanted to presence that. This coverage that's covering Wilton's face is from a broadside that was created in Boston much later than the wallpaper itself. And it's a broadside that basically says, caution colored people, police, catchers are looking for black people because we're going to send you back to the plantation, for lack of a better word. So this just goes to show that, hey, this is supposed to be New York, you're free. It's, you know, 1830s, and it's like, no, we're talking 1850s here, you're not free. We have the Fugitive Slave Act, which I also layer with a couple of things. In pink, and if you all have the, I don't know, I don't see any guides left, but the guide itself shows in pink a drawing that I did based on something that happened in Galveston, Texas, I think in 2019, where a black man who had autism was sort of wandering and loitering in an amusement park and was picked up by police, and the police tied a rope to him and led him out. And just that image of someone like basically being tied is similar to that of someone being lynched and led by police. And that happened a few years ago. So all this to say that all this stuff that is shown in this idealistic view of black and white people living in harmony, well, it's a little complicated. So on top of that, I drew in blue here 2 images of a Basotho warrior. Basotho is from Lesotho, which is a country within South Africa, and they have this stick fighting tradition, as well as known for sort of living in the mountains, riding horses, and such. And so I wanted to layer that as sort of an image to imagine and to uplift this brother here who was going through what he was going through with the police. So there's that. And then above that, which you can see faintly, are 3 generations of my own family. My mom, my grandmother, and my great-grandmother in blue. And that's, again, me just wanting to presence blackness and black people. And, you know, we're in a house that was previously the Browns presided in. We think family and such. And I'm like, well, this was my department, and I want my family to be here. And so I included them here. The next motif, well, this is the same motif, but the next set of imagery in this motif is thinking about, when you think about New York and New Jersey, when you think about Manhattan, where does that name come from? Manhattan. Whose land is it? Whose land was it? Who was there first? And so this is my interpretation / response / imagining of the ship, the Half Moon, which was sailed by Henry Hudson. And that might sound familiar because we think about the whole Hudson Valley, which is named after Henry Hudson, who was an Englishman that worked for the Dutch. And you know the Dutch in New York? New Amsterdam, etc. So this is me imagining if Henry Hudson's ship was destroyed, what would it be? But what we do know is that the first people who were there were the Lenape people, and Lenape-Hogan means the Lenape people. So I wanted to presence that story and sort of that imagining. Couple of other things. This guy here, which again, if you're standing back there, I'm sure you can't see him, but I invite you to look close and touch at any point. This is Thomas Downing, who was known as the Oyster King of New York, black man. And he was said to be, during his time, one of the wealthiest people in New York. But he couldn't get citizenship, and it wasn't made legal for him to have citizenship given his background, which I'm not fully sure of why he wasn't able to. But it wasn't legal until the day after he died. And lastly, this panel here, I was thinking about, sort of hidden in here is that image of the cotton, like people working the cotton fields, and thinking about how we went from enslavement to prison labor, people working on the chain gangs, people who were, for example, either lived in free territory but were brought back into slavery, different slave owners who had debt and would use their slaves to sort of pay off their debt by doing prison labor. So they were, it's basically, and this is not my term, but slavery by another name. So that's what this is. It shows chain gangs here, chain gangs here. There's also in pink a mugshot of a 19th century black woman. And then above that, I included two things. One is that broadside from the NAACP that talks about the shame of America and how many lynchings had taken place between 1889 and 1922 that were documented. And then sort of overlaid with that, I wanted to present some indigenous stories thinking about imprisonment and thinking about enslavement. So I created my own image of the Long Walk, which took place in what is now known as New Mexico, where indigenous people were forced to walk some odd 400 miles on foot and removed from their land and placed in reservation prison. I also include my version of ledger drawings from Fort Monroe, which was another place that people, native peoples, were brought to and imprisoned because they were protecting their land. So that's the view of New York from New Jersey, my response. Any questions? No questions? What?
curious about your choice of beads.
Mm-hmm. Yes and no. I was just talking to a group earlier about this. So throughout, there's two things I want to say that you'll notice throughout. There's some kind of adornment on almost everything. Three things. There are these borders on all of the motifs. And I forget what the third thing was. But it's a combination of things. One is there are certain aesthetics that I wanted to make a nod to, certain traditions, quilting traditions. When I think about even this motif here, having the mirrors, thinking about different ceremonies and rituals within Western Africa where there's dance, and within the costume there's mirrors that are sort of connection to the ancestors or a connection to an otherness or another spirit. So that's presencing that by having that that aesthetic. And some of it, this, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I made a mistake. When I was creating the layers to this print. So you see how this came out like kind of like a little brownish reddish color that's very close to the color that's next to it. That wasn't intended. And that's because for some reason when I was creating the files, I didn't, I included the same lines on each layer of color, and so you can't see them. So the point of using beadwork was actually to redraw those lines that I made as a mistake, because just to let you know about the process, you'll notice that there's stitching and a hem that separates each motif. So there's a bunch of panels because of the way we print. The table that we print on is only a certain width, which means, and the screens themselves are a specific size. So it takes 3 screens, 1, 2, 3, to print one panel, and then we sewed the panels together. And so all that's to say that, like, if you make a mistake, you gotta live with it and figure it out. And so the beadwork was to fix that mistake. But in general, the adornments are both a nod to certain aesthetics and traditions within the Black diaspora and beyond. So even though I'm making a nod to quilting, this technique and this aesthetic is actually Bojagi technique, which is Korean. So again, just presencing other perspectives and aesthetics beyond what already existed in this house. Any questions before we go to the next? All right, let's go to this one since we're here. So this one, you'll notice, is here and it's over there. It's just a different color combination of the same thing. And this is my view of Boston Harbor. And for me, what I wanted to do was make a commentary on the slave trade and say that, you know, when you think about the North, there's this myth that, you know, it's a free place, there were abolitionists, that slavery was a Southern thing. And that's not true. We even think about the Brown family and how they were implicated in slavery through rum, through sugar, through what used to be called slave cotton. So even the textile industry here, a lot of the textile that was made here was sent down to the Caribbean to clothe the slaves. And so this is me saying, like, it's complicated and the North is implicated in it. And these waters that surround us are a part of that. That's proof of that. And I wanted to juxtapose that. So this motif, this repeating motif of how Black bodies were situated and placed and crowded on slave ships is juxtaposed with tons of dancing. And this if you know me, you know my mom was a dancer. Dance is super important to me. My work is very gestural, etc. So I wanted to sort of show black bodies in dance, whether it's rejoicing, whether it's struggling, whether it's, you know, a death drop, voguing. I wanted to show that as a counter to slavery and sort of think about, like, you know, for those who were enslaved, we've been talking about The Little Mermaid recently, thinking about those who were enslaved and jumped off the slave ship. And, you know, did they drown or did they create a whole world? Were they dancing? Did they find connections to the moon? I have phases of the moon here. These mirrors, again, to connect to the ancestors, to connect to otherworldliness, to connect to another spirit. Fish, sky, water, connected. So that's what's happening here.
What I'm really responding to right now is the movement within each motif and the gestural dancing movement. I'm also thinking about this as, like, if this was part of, like, a performance, how do the beads make sound, or, like, what is that activating within, like, the space? And just also the reflection of the mirrors, like, how are you viewing yourself as a black body, as a black person in this space? How that can also be another element to this work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you could talk more about, the fact that these adornments, like you said, are mirrors, and also the fact that this is a translucent material. And I guess, was it more than just, like, being able to sort of see through, or was that just a really important decision with it?
It was very intentional to make sure the fabric was not solid. I wish that you could, well, actually, I don't wish that. I was going to say, I wish you could see the original wallpaper more, but I think if you could see it more, it would be even harder to see my response. And one of the things that I will say, you know, we all as artists know when we have successes and when we have things we need to tweak is, like, it's so hard to read the piece in this space because we're used to seeing art sometimes, I guess, in spaces where there's gallery light or even overhead light. We literally have these sconces to light this space. And then on top of that, the underpainting, in a sense, is gray. It's drab. So it really, in some ways, brings down the, like, vibrancy of my response. But doesn't history do that? So I think, yes. It's intentional that it's see-through and invites you in. You have moments here where there's no ink so you can see better. I hope that it, like, invites the viewer to come in and to touch, to move, to see that there are certain elements within each piece that are a direct response or literally situated, like having my friends here and their love story with this love story, like, it's all intentional. Like, you're supposed to be able to sort of see a dialogue happen between those two things.
To that point, kind of the next stop for these pieces, would you hope that they would be somewhere that it's only about your work and only about that?
Yes. The hope is that the work will go on tour in both spaces that don't have the wallpaper, and in the spaces that don't have wallpaper, there actually starts to become a series of happenings where you invite the public to think about wherever that happening is happening. Let's say it happens in Providence at the Waterfire Arts Center, for example. Like, then we can start to think about, like, all right, as someone who is currently situated in Providence in Rhode Island, how are we thinking about certain monuments or certain histories that are local to Rhode Island, and can I invite the public to sort of remix or layer my piece and also some other things that I might blow up, like large scale of documents that are specific to Rhode Island, for example, like the slave voyage, the Sally, and invite the public to vandalize it or to remix it or to graffiti it or whatnot. So there's thoughts of doing that, and there's also thoughts of, like, the other spaces where this exists, country clubs, ski lodges, other institutions. Hamilton College has this wallpaper. The White House. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I think I'd like to sort of see how it feels when it really gets to shine, and also when it really gets to challenge the space.
I think this would be really well placed in like Market Square, like the university student going into those buildings and like just knowing the history of that. Like this would be very powerful in that context.
All right, we should talk after. Yeah. Any other questions before we move on?
Well, I have a question.
Yes.
Generally, would Brown, I mean, after the world tour, would Brown consider allowing these to cover the original? Because that word you used, covering, which you heard from someone else, I feel like for students coming in, this would be much more thought-provoking and contribute to learning and dialogue than the wallpapers.
You know, that's not a question for me. That's a question for Brown and the powers that be. But I think, you know, I remember writing this statement, and I don't remember exactly what I said, but I think I said something along the lines of like, the point of this is for us to get used to not seeing the wallpaper so we can imagine something else there. And I used to feel really strongly that it doesn't matter what I put on the walls. The point is we're going to get used to not seeing this wallpaper, and they're going to get rid of it. And now I actually feel really differently because I don't think you have to have this wallpaper in order to have the conversations that we need to have about history. However, I think that there's something to be said about having both when it's done in a way that like this doesn't continue to be the main voice. The only voice, yes, and the main voice, yes.
Yeah, you need both voices because the wallpaper, which I originally thought was a mural, just like you're talking about your stuff being wallpaper, but it's a tapestry. You know, we have to realize what in this case, the wallpaper meant when it was made and when it was put there and so forth. And now we have to work out how your art can present a different story because it's totally referential to what is already there.
Yeah.
And I have no idea how the hell you make that work.
Well, it's not.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
doesn't
no,
really
we're
get so
dialoguing.
referential. It's responsive, but it also lives in its own space as well.
Yeah.
I'd like to suggest you and Becky Davis do a conversation, because I would love to hear the two of you talk about your work individually, because her work with monuments is so powerful.
Yes.
And I think that this is a reflection of that same beauty of like you, just the two of you talking about your work together. Could we maybe have that?
Yeah, I mean, Becky and I are right next to each other in studio, so that's my homie. Yeah, I'd love to. I love her work and her spirit. All right, next, because I don't want to keep you all night, let's move to Niagara Falls, because, I remember what the third thing was when I said, yes, there's this sort of aesthetic of quilting, and yes, there are the adornments, but another thing that you'll notice throughout every tapestry is a presencing of the indigenous people who were first there, who lived in the regions, in the spaces and the places and the land that each motif represents. So those are sewn on throughout in some way, shape, or form. If it's not a specific group, then it's at least like a mentioning of a very contemporary movement, just to remember that we're always on native land. So I wanted to make sure that was present throughout, not just on the motif that shamefully depicts performative scene of indigenous people. Okay, so let's come over to Harriet, aka View of Niagara Falls. So the thing that I want to sort of rip through with this one is the obvious, of course, thinking about Niagara Falls, thinking about Canada or even New York or parts of New York, and freedom and what that meant. Thinking about Niagara Falls, thinking about electricity, hydroelectric power, and what that does to indigenous people, what that does to the land, making dams and such. But I want to bring your attention to this here, which is an image of a woman giving birth in a squatting position with the support of two others. And this is here for a series of reasons, which I'll share. At the time that I found out that I got the residency to make this project, I was pregnant. And postpartum, just a few months postpartum is when we started production on the work. And I was thinking about, I was thinking about the work, but I was also thinking about myself and thinking about my body and thinking about just what it means to give birth and sort of power over people's bodies, especially people with uteruses. And so as I began to do a little research more around like electropower, one name that came up, of course, was Nikola Tesla. And when we think Tesla, we might think about the cars and Elon Musk, but Tesla's name because Elon Musk loves and admires Nikola Tesla, who was an inventor, a scientist, an engineer, etc., and created the electric plant in Niagara Falls. Also was a proponent of eugenics. And so I thought again about birth, about nature, about patriarchy, and how it is echoed in the ways in which femmes and femme bodies are controlled, just like Mother Nature is controlled by the human touch to advance technology, how people are pushed out, etc. So that's why this image is here of this woman giving birth as sort of a conversation and sort of like an echo, if I may, of Mother Nature. Strong, still, we're still on this earth. Mother Nature is doing her thing. So that's what this motif is. You saw the cartoon of sort of what happens if Niagara Falls is developed around tourism. I also included some dying fish here just because of what some things that are seen as green energy and advancing technology still destroy the habitat and the animals that live on the land. Haudenosaunee, indigenous people of this region. Also have a figure drowning here, just again thinking about how dams and such are created and how they drown out not only the animals, but sort of drown out the people and pushing out the people who originally occupied the space or lived in the space or inhabited the space in order to advance technology and energy. So that's the view of Niagara Falls. And then these little shell-like beads is just a nod to the water. Questions? Okay. Yes.
I'm just curious about the patterns in like all this in particular, but in all of these.
Yes.
Are they specific to the images?
Yes. You mean the swirl? This motif that?
Well, there's the swirl, and then there's these larger kind of like florets or something. And I'm just curious whether that there's like a meaning to them that's specific to each individual image.
So one thing that I'll say is that these sort of swirls that happen, you'll see in some way, shape, or form or in every motif. And that's sort of, again, a pattern from a Malian textile that I presenced in this piece to, again, have Black diasporic aesthetic. But also I feel like they work as arrows, and not arrows that necessarily point you in one specific direction, but hopefully like help you to scan the whole image. So that's throughout every piece. Sometimes it's larger than other times, and it's in different colors, but that's there. And then this again is the same sort of ideas. It is that sort of aesthetic, but like I think thinking about repeat patterns and quilting and even certain print traditions, be it Bogolan or indigo dyeing and such, like just including that in the imagery again to presence Black people. Yes.
Hi, I have a question about the natural birth motif. I'm
Mhm.
curious about the position of her hands. Was there any reason why you chose to draw her hands upwards?
Yes. I chose to draw her hands upwards to show like strength and grasp. She's right on the edge of the river. So again, as her being like a personified version of sort of Mother Nature holding tight and like continuing to produce and thrive and grow and be in the world. I have her hands up and her hands clasped. And I also have her in a squatting position because also just thinking about like birthing and the 21st century and how, you know, in Western medicine, there's a lot of C-sections and sort of lying down to have birth, to give birth, and just remembering like there are other ways, and they've been working and working and working for a long time, and so I put her in that position.
Thank you.
Okay, let's switch over here. This is really difficult to see, so you might want to either reference the papers or just remember maybe some of the slides. But this is the view of West Point Military Academy. Ooh, we're draped in the new is hanging on to the old here. But I'm going to lift it up, thank you, to show the cadets who are practicing and the onlookers. So, just a quick story. When I was starting to research this and did a talk and was sharing with some students at Brown about like what I was doing and how one of the first things that I do whenever I like research something is like, okay, where are the Black people? And so I was thinking about West Point Military Academy, and I was like, okay, who were the first Black soldiers? And I learned about the Buffalo Soldiers and the 10th Cavalry. And I was really excited because originally I was like, I'm going to include their portraits. I found in the archive in Worcester at the American Antiquarian Society, they actually had an album of the soldiers from around the same time as post-Civil War. I was like, this is amazing, I'm going to include them. And then a student said to me, you know what I feel when I think about the 10th Cavalry? I think about the Buffalo Soldiers as destroying my people. I think about the Buffalo Soldiers aiding in westward expansion and colonialism and like moving us to reservations that like really traumatized us and really abused us. And then I said, oh, well, I can't include the soldiers' portraits then. I have to think about this more. And so, as I thought about it more and did digging in the archive, I was thinking about what does it mean to be Black, post-Civil War, years and years of slavery. What do you do? What do you do? How are you going to make a living? Why did so many people remain sharecroppers or still work on the plantations and such? What are you supposed to do? What do people do nowadays still to finance their education and such? They join the army. And so I was really intrigued by this broadside, which showed a Union veteran soldier, Black man, and this whole vision of Reconstruction and its misfortunes. So I wanted to presence that narrative and also think about what it must have meant for the Buffalo Soldiers to be fighting against other people of color to help in the effort to colonize. It's complicated, and I still to this day am like, whoa. So I included that image from the archive, and then I have bison throughout the piece to talk about when there was this westward expansion, how the bison were destroyed and killed and moved to make way for cattle industry, for cows and for beef. And I also include a locomotive because part of the westward expansion and technology was building a railroad, building a path between the East and the West. So in some ways, it's colonialism in a whole nother way because, again, you're pushing out indigenous people to make room for something else. And that's really, those are the main motifs here. There's also a rattlesnake that sort of represents that region as well in Arizona and in New Mexico, where the 10th Cavalry, the Buffalo Soldiers, fought against indigenous peoples. Questions? All right, we have one more, all the way at the end. Hi. Yes. And I'm actually realizing that I'm taking you in the order that I made the piece. So first there was New York, then there was Boston, then Niagara Falls, then West Point, and lastly, the view of Virginia. This, of course, has the Natural Bridge, the view of Natural Bridge, which is in Virginia. So there's the Natural Bridge there. And then down here, we have Black and white people in harmony. We have a unidentified, non-specific group of indigenous people performing for white onlookers here. And so, what did I do? I created the biggest version of what remains the thesis throughout all of these pieces, which is remembering that we are on native land, which I put here. And by this time, to tell you the truth, I'm pretty sure it was April. The opening was in April. And it was time to really focus the energy and finish the last piece. And at this point, I had done so much research and such that I felt like I just wanted to graffiti the original wallpaper. So that's why there are these sort of graffiti letters and, like sort of punk aesthetics in language of like fuck the monarchy and such. So what's included in this motif? The biggest thing I could say is the youth. So there are a group of youth who are positioned in a way that they're looking at the viewer, kind of looking down at us. And the reason for this is just to say that, like, I feel like this next generation, you know, I have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and they just are more aware than I was when I was a child. They have language for things that I didn't have when I was a child. And so, you know, I think that they hold us and will continue to hold us accountable in ways that we couldn't do when we were younger, because we didn't have the language or the knowledge. We weren't having these conversations in the 90s as young people, in the 80s, in the same ways that we're having them today. And I feel that strongly. So that's why I wanted to show the next generation, just as a reminder of, like, hey, don't forget about slavery and colonialism and genocide and imperialism. Don't forget about what it has done and where we are and how far we have to go. So that's that. In terms of the historical stuff, there was an old lithograph print of the monarchy of England, because I believe Virginia was the first, you know, in the 13 colonies. And they still had the monarchy still had a strong hold. So there's portraits of them from that archival piece, and that goes throughout the piece. Here I have, in sort of graffiti letters, we see you, we see you, we see you. And that's a double whammy of, like, both, like, we see this is not it, but also I want to remember, like, we see that this is wrong. We see you. We again are acknowledging that we are on native land. Over here, there's that racial integrity health bill, which was awful, but real, and in specific to this region, that basically talked about racial mixing not being a good thing because of superiority and inferiority from a medical point of view. So I just want to, again, in the same way that I did in the View of New York from New Jersey, say that, like, you know, even though we have these idealistic views, not long after and to this day, we're still grappling with certain ideas around race and around history. What else is in this one? I mean, that's it. There are the names of different indigenous groups from this region where the natural bridge is located. I made another mistake, which is down here. Again, I printed Thomas Jefferson on every layer, so he doesn't really come out here, but if I were ever to print this again or print a paper version, then I would fix my mistake and you would see him, and I've sort of graffitied over his face because, and I have, like, one of the youth stomping on him. Because when I was reading about the natural bridge, I read that, like, Jefferson bought 150 acres around it and owned the bridge, and I just know that, like, that's not true. But it was, like, how did that deal take place? What was that deal? So that's the view of the natural bridge. Any questions? Comments?
Thanks for I was just gonna say thanks for sharing that edit that you, like, when you talked to the student and decided that you weren't gonna depict something a certain way. That was really cool to hear.
Thanks.
I love this one.
Me too. Thanks.
It's cool to see, like, what happens when you have less time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite?
No, I don't. You know, I think they all are very different and saying different things, and I think when So I worked, again, this is not what I love about printmaking for me, at least in my approach, is it's very collaborative and like, you know, I get to work with friends. So I just remember every time at the printing table with Anna and Yoli and Sage, and I'd see it, you know, when you print this on the table, it's on a table of white, like off-white muslin fabric, so you can really see it, and I would be like, oh my gosh, these colors look great, this looks great, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. And then Joel and Liza would like sew these sections of what would be the border, and I was like, I love this color combination, oh my gosh, wait, I love this color combination. So like, I don't know, I guess the answer is no. I like them all, they're my babies. Other questions, comments before we wrap it up?
I want to say a couple things. One is thank you so much to you and everybody else for making tonight possible. I'm in education and I want my teenagers to know this and feel this and be here. So I'm going to try to figure that out. The other thing I want to say is looking at the panel here on the left and the center with the pendants, and you refer to them as mirrors. I grew up in Rhode Island in a costume jewelry family where we did piecework, a lot of piecework. If you sat down to watch TV, you did piecework. And those pendants were a big part of our lives. And thinking about my grandfather, I grew up being told that we were very much working class. My grandfather would bring pieces like that and the other pieces that needed attaching to moms who were home, and a lot of moms of color, and to even think about that hierarchy as much as we were, the Gorhams were not sitting in front of the TV gluing pieces of costume jewelry together. So anyway, just sitting with that a little bit. Those pieces, that Rhode Island history.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. And also, I don't know if Liza left already, but
I'm right here.
Oh, hi! I keep forgetting the name of this place.
Wolfie Meyer.
Wolf Meyer.
Yeah, that's like that's where all.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it all came from.
No, it's in Onlyville. It's next to Atlantic. It's a part of Atlantic
It's
Mills.
that wild space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to
Highly recommended.
yeah.
To go.
Save a lot of time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.